LeVar Burton, good news and bad news. The latest from Podnews.net with Magellan AI, helping you build your podcast ad plan. LeVar good news. At a session at CES, LeVar Burton unveiled his first children's podcast. Sound Detectives will be launched in Q2 by SiriusXM's Stitcher. And LeVar, bad news. In an end of the role of humans to do your reading into a microphone jobs, Apple Books has launched a digital narration service to turn your ebook into an audiobook. This is how it sounds.
I hadn't noticed, because I'd been staring at my feet. I couldn't believe the fields actually had an end. It was further away than I would have liked, but at least I now had something tangible to run toward. I told myself I could make it. And I did. Barely.
It's nice, but no LeVar Burton. In Vulture, Nick Quah is the latest to predict a rough year for the podcast industry in 2023. We'll link to that today. The latest update of Slack automatically produces transcripts when you upload audio files, apparently. Is the listener to your true crime podcast the person who actually did the crime? Narratively looks at the story behind one listener of The Trail Went Cold, who's now in prison. A new newsletter from Brad Nolan called Segway shares advice for radio professionals looking to add podcast creation to their library of content. And in Germany, the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation have produced a 40-page study on left-leaning political podcasts, comparing podcasts in the country with those in the US. It's a Monday, so time for some tech stuff in the Podcasting 2.0 board meeting podcast. A future for cross-app comments was clarified. ActivityPub will be used, but instead of podcast apps having to act as full ActivityPub clients, users will use OAuth to log into anything compatible with Mastodon's API, including Pleroma and Mastodon itself, to post comments. So they're always visible there too. Apps can use the ThreadCap library to quickly grab all the comments for an episode to display them, and best practice is that at least one comment is visible from the episode's screen. Our RSS feed has the Social Interact tag in our episodes if you need a test case. The requirement that podcast value only appears once for a show or episode has been removed. You can now have multiple podcast value tags if you're using web monetization and lightning payments, for example. We use both if you need a test case. And podcast app Podcast Guru releases new apps this week, which are PodPing enabled, so you'll see a new episode the moment it's published. And in podcast news, Texture and Artifact is a new project from James Errington, combining personal monologues, field recordings, interviews with friends and family, clips from old cassettes, occasional drama and original music, all knitted together into narrative soundscapes. It's from the person who gave us Centuries of Sound, a beautiful piece of sound design, one episode a month, and the first is out today. In 4 Things for Your Podcast, the story behind why Avery Warner cancelled an episode and said, "My guest and I didn't have an alignment on certain views. What happened next I thought was very unprofessional. I can't support nor promote that kind of behaviour." It's a learning for us all. And Bacon is My Podcast, a unique approach to the interview podcast, is going twice weekly as of this week. Interviews continue on Monday with hosts Jim and Mike. Thursdays will be personal experiences and stories about their lives, current events, and discussions about the world of movies, comics, television, and music. This podcast is sponsored by Magellan AI. Every month, Magellan AI works out the top spenders in podcasting, as well as those making big moves in their podcast ad budgets. Who will be December's top advertisers? Be the first to find out in their free webinar. You can register now at magellan.ai. And that's the latest from our newsletter. To read all the stories and subscribe, we're at podnews.net.